What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday. Today we're going to talk about the history of Ultra Magnus with KFC, with X-Transbots, the Citizen Stacks, the Commander Stacks, the history of the designers. I have a designer that designed something for Keith early on. He comes in to talk a little bit. There's a lot to talk about here. It's not just about the figure and how cool the figure is. We're going to do that too, but it's not just about that, which I prefer. I like to get into some muddy waters and some nooks and crannies and really talk about something other than it looks great, the paint's great, the pitch. Like it's just, it's fine, that's cool, but I like to get a little deeper here, so to speak. There's actually an awful lot to talk about regarding this company, its different brand identities, and this character specifically, which I find interesting. And hopefully you will too. This is one Sit Down Saturday I've been kind of really excited about since the pieces of it started coming together, so I'm glad to get it out. We'll talk a little bit about the first aid as well, but only because we're kind of discussing X-Transbots. We're not going to take too much time on that, but we will discuss it. First, a little bit of housekeeping, because we have to do a little bit of housekeeping, and it's very, very small. Real quick, the X-Transbots Flip Out, the toy version, yes, it was a re-upload. I went away for like 2.5 weeks, and I had stuff all scheduled. At the very end, I tried to get that rung video in there. It ended up messing up my schedule. It always happens no matter what. Whenever I go out of town, I always have one mess up at least, usually more. This time it was just one, but I double booked something for one day. So on a particular Friday, something came out and also Flip Out came out. So I dropped Flip Out back down, but then when I go to repost it, it doesn't like go into your regular cycle. So I had to take it down and re-upload it. So it wasn't a scam or anything. It was just an error on my part and me trying to fix the error. But yeah, he's over here. Got the whole team. They're looking good. Next, today is the last day to order something from DMH that we offered as a pre-order. We offered Sherpa and woven blankets for Soundwave, Dinobots in robot mode, the Primes, or the Megatrons. A lot of people have hit me up. I've answered some questions and I haven't heard anything back, which is fine. But if you want to get back with me about it, today is the last day. At 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time, all bets are off. If you need to get in contact with me about it, email bobbyskullface@gmail.com. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. And we'll start with Citizen Stack. So for those that don't know, KFC and X-Transbots are pretty much the same brand. KFC released a figure called Citizen Stack, which is kind of an IDW take on Ultra Magnus, right? It was their first attempt at an Ultra Magnus, and it was received fairly well. It was a pretty well put together toy, and it was actually one of the characters and one of the releases of KFC/X-Transbots that began to make X-Transbots a better and more reputable company across the board. Now, this is tied up in an idea of Keith's that relates to another product. I happen to be contacted by the designer of said product, and he has a non-disclosure agreement, so he couldn't get too into the woods with me about it, but he did have a long format conversation with me about his kind of dealings and history with X-Transbots, all of which positive. There's no like muddy drama in it, but it's an interesting story that he has to tell. That uncut conversation is going on Patreon, hopefully today, at the very worst tomorrow, but all of that in its long form content is available, just not here. However, here is a snippet from that conversation where he talks a little bit about an Ultra Magnus project that he was brought on board for to design for X-Transbots way early in the X-Transbots era, or KFC era, whatever you want to call it, and we'll go ahead and get to that now.
I worked for Keith as like a freelance 3D designer back in starting in 2016. I worked with him through till 2018. I haven't had any contact with him since, so I'm not in the the up and up on his current information, but I do have some insight as to kind of what his design philosophy was back when I was working with him, the direction that he kind of wanted to go with some of the projects. I can tell you what's changed from when I was working with him to what's currently in place. So back in 2016, I was a university student trying to make some cash to help pay tuition. I sent an email to every single third-party company that I could find contact information for, and Keith and MMC actually both happened to be ones who reached out to me. Keith said, "I'm not particularly interested in this design, but would you be willing to do other stuff for me?"
Interesting.
And that's kind of how it started.
It sounds like you're like shopping a demo.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you're trying to get a record deal. Okay, so you hand that in.
Yeah.
And you get put to work on the second project?
Yeah, and the second project was an Ultra Magnus masterpiece.
Well, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and here's the thing. The Ultra Magnus that is now available for pre-order is nothing at all like the design I originally made for him. And that's because when he came to me for the Ultra Magnus design, the requirement that he had for me was that it had to fit MP10. It had to go on MP10, no exceptions. It was an armor and a trailer, not a full figure.
Interesting. I mean, I get that, especially because he had probably already, by that time, he had that other Ultra Magnus, that IDW looking one.
Yeah.
You know, like every time an Ultra Magnus gets done, there's always half, it's like Aunt May, like in Spider-Man, where they're like, half the people are like, can you please kill Aunt May? And the other half is like, if you kill Aunt May, I'll never pick up another comic book as long as other, like Ultra Magnus is like one of those, right? Where it's like half feel like you have to do the robot with the power armor, and the other half are like, please, whatever you do not do the robot with power armor.
Yeah, and I think that the Ultra Magnus he showed off today looks 1,000 times better than the armor I made for him, because that armor really suffered having to kind of constrain itself around NP10 and NP10's proportions.
Right.
Because the second design element he wanted was that he didn't want it any taller than MP10. It had to be, if not the same size, only like an inch taller.
Really?
Because if you remember, a big complaint with the official one is that it's too tall.
Oh yeah, I guess that was.
He wanted to undercut that kind of market and find a way where he could sell it to people who weren't happy with the size of the official Ultra Magnus.
I guess that makes sense.
So then I worked on that for him. It was admittedly a pretty fast project. He hired me in 2017. I think I cranked it out in like 2 months, and that was all done. And don't have a whole lot to say about that other than...
And like I said, the long format version of that conversation is available on the Patreon. The link to the Patreon is in the description. But ultimately, it didn't come out, right? His vision of the MP10 upgrade Ultra Magnus, which I think probably would have been pretty successful, did not come out. And for the longest time, the masterpiece version of Ultra Magnus has pretty much sat on everybody's shelves, and everybody's been pretty content with it, including myself. Even though it was kind of one of the first releases of Takara's that began to show weakness. It was the first masterpiece since the Sideswipe era that it was like, oh, this is a swing and not a home run. It's a base hit, but it's not a home run. It was the first time, like, kind of seeing blood in the water with them. And if you look around at a lot of the Takara offerings and a lot of the third-party offerings, there are a few that stand out as, this could probably use an update. And Ultra Magnus is certainly one of them. He was, even for the time he came out, he never seemed quite up to the standard that we all knew. So then recently, we got reveals of Transbots' latest offering of Ultra Magnus, which to me looks pretty promising, and we have to talk about it, right? But in order to talk about it, let's go ahead and go through all of the pictures and kind of give a breakdown of it. So let's have that segment of this conversation, and then we'll talk about why we got these pictures the way we got them. So we'll start with alt mode, and I don't think there's a whole lot to write home about here. I'm hoping that it gets the kind of Transbots paint treatment that we've come to expect recently, where they've really been taking the brush to their figures as of late, because the blue here looks a little plain to me. The chrome on the wheels looks like a nice touch, etc., but I think that the overall shape, dimensions, proportions of it, etc., look true to form and appropriate for the piece. We also are going to get some kind of gimmicks and stuff with it, which is cool. The two different driver seats, the steering wheel, the little control console up there, all that. So kind of typical masterpiece stuff, and Keith likes to do that stuff, so it makes sense to me that it's there. The next thing I want to look at is him in robot mode, but specifically I want to look at him next to MP44, because if you compare that to MP10 next to the old Magnus, like, this Magnus is much more in scale, and I went to go double check that I felt better about that, and I was right, at least according to the scale chart, which is, of course, hit or miss depending on which episode you're watching, but it's much more accurate. It seems much more appropriate to the way I remember it, where it wasn't like he was like this hulking Goliath just stomping around, but he was like kind of the tallest guy in the room, you know what I mean? And I think that they did that well. I also really like the color palette. Like, I like the darker red on the chest, at least seemingly so from these photographs. Proportions of the bot look good. Arms perhaps look a little long, but nothing terrible. Like, if you see, he's got his elbows bent a little bit and his hands kind of end where I would like them to end anyway. But other than that, looks pretty sharp to me. I find it funny that a lot of these photos that they use to kind of sell this guy make a point to show how much better it is than the official Takara masterpiece. And when I say that, if you look at the picture of him in the Iron Man pose, it's like trying to show like, yeah, ours actually moves, unlike the one that you had previously, where that was kind of a big criticism, not only from me, but from most people. I think that the original MP Magnus did not have a whole lot of articulation and therefore not a whole lot of character, not a whole lot of life. In fact, the original Ultra Magnus used this picture as a promo tool, which I was recently reminded of by a friend of mine, just to show just how cool he can look. However, unfortunately, it just really shows how awkward and bananas he looks. And I think that KFC took all of that into, or I keep saying KFC, Transbots took all of that into account when they did this Ultra Magnus to make sure that it did all the things that the original couldn't do. And you see the ab crunch here. You also see it in other photographs that they use, like when he's kind of walking and stuff, or maybe even running. All of that looks true to form. All of that looks what you would expect from kind of the current climate regarding articulation. And I just think that overall it's a really sharp, good looking, more scale accurate and less clunky representation of the character. And to add on to that, and also to tie it back to kind of my previous point, if you look at the back of Ultra Magnus, they go out of their way once again to say, look, it's pretty clean, no butt flaps, no awkward backpacks. He's not too deep of a robot, so to speak. Like they just looks like they did a better job. Now, I will say that sometimes the transformation engineering is not always the most elegant and smooth with Transbots. So the amount of kind of workaround that they're going to have to do to kind of tuck away all these truck pieces, I do have some concerns about just how smooth that will be at the end of the day. However, that aside, that's not necessarily my strong suit anyway. I can't deny that this Magnus looks pretty sick. So let's go ahead and talk about these pictures, right? These pictures got released, as far as I know, on social media. That's where they all hit. And it was a lot of them. It was an entire photo dump. It was on their Facebook. It was probably on their Weibo. It was like all on that stuff, right? Not too many days before these reveals was a big show with a third-party panel that had a whole ton of reveals, of which Transbots was absent from. Noticeably absent from. Some companies, when you don't see them at these big reveals, you don't think too much of it. Their presence is always felt. So their absence was even more so. Now, let's rewind the clocks about a month or so, perhaps before that, maybe even less. We get this huge dump of other releases they have. And then days before this event with this third-party panel, we get a ton of repaint dumps that they have coming. All of which done on their socials, all of which got the word out successfully, and all of which were completely absent from this third-party panel. And my question is why? It's never been a problem in the past. It's always been utilized as a tool in the past. There's something different about the rollout now, and my question is why? And my guess is politics. Politics between all of the companies. It just doesn't make sense. Could it be that it just happened to go that way? That they just happened to keep the reveals to themselves and not utilize this huge platform? Sure. Do I believe that? Not for a second. The truth is that a lot of this stuff is going to be business, right? Shows are going to have business relationships. Those relationships are going to be tied up with distributors. And once those relationships become tied up with distributors, those relationships are going to have relationships. And for everybody to be happy with each other, everybody has to kind of play by the same playbook. And my guess is somebody's not playing by the other's playbook. And as a result, Keith said, don't need you, I can do it on my own. And I think he's right. It's not like his reveals didn't get the buzz that it would have gotten at the panel. It was just the timing. I think about this sort of stuff a lot, right? Like the greasing of palms and the utilization of resources and who gets paid for what. As you know, I have a weekly podcast called Nerd Rage Radio. Nerd Rage Radio brings in absolutely $0 into my bank account. $0. I make no money off of Nerd Rage Radio whatsoever. In fact, I've spent $100 a year for 6 years. So $600 has cost me on Nerd Rage. Well, I guess I have Nerd Rage t-shirts and hoodies on Teespring, so that actually makes a little bit of money, but nowhere near what Nerd Rage is costing me, right? I pay a server $100 a year to host my podcast. That server then distributes my podcast to a number of different outlets, right? iTunes, Pandora, Spotify, wherever. Apple iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, all these places that are playing my podcast are making money from my podcast on there, even if it doesn't have ads. Because they're able to go to different sponsors, different advertisers in general, and say, look how many people are utilizing our platform on a weekly basis for hours. And I'm part of that. Not a huge part, not a Joe Rogan part, but I'm part of it. And I'm not getting any compensation, which is fine, but I'm paying for it. So I am paying someone to make money off of me, right? And it's kind of the cost of doing business in a lot of ways right now, and it sucks. So if I'm Keith and I'm thinking, man, I'm not having a great vibe here with some of the players, but if I send my stuff to your platform, it's making your platform more impactful, or I could just do it on my own platform and be more impactful on my own platform, where people are going to share it from my kind of ground zero, where people are going to share it from my servers, where people are going to share it from things that I own and I run, I think I'm going to do that. And if that's the case, which I think it is, I can't be mad at him for it. There's just no other logical way to look at it from my perspective of having these reveals bookend the third-party panel and not actually participate in the third-party panel when every year and every third-party panel before that they have. So my guess is something's rotten in Denmark over there. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know what it is. And I don't have any real suspicions other than perhaps something that involved Coot 1.0 or whatever it was. That's the only guess I got. But I don't know. But something is amiss. Believe what I say when I tell you. Something is amiss. But it doesn't change the fact that I think this Ultra Magnus looks awesome, and I think I am going to swap mine out. And I'm not a huge swap out guy, but I think I am going to swap mine out. I think that the significance is big enough where it might be worth it. There's one other thing I want to talk about, and that is what we saw that looks like a Protectabot leg. It does look like a Protectabot leg, right, for a Defensor from Transbots. However, it also looks like a medical bed from First Aid. So my guess is this is going to come with First Aid in some regard, and that's how it's going to do it. There's been a lot of people asking, like, are they going to ask for more money? Is it going to be a separate sale and all that? And I'm telling you, I don't know. For sure, I don't know. I have suspicions that they could do it a number of different ways. What I would like to see is have it packaged with First Aid as an accessory, which could also be utilized for the combiner. I think that would be the cool, smart way to go about it. And that's about all I got. I know that's a little brief, and maybe as this Defensor kind of continues to materialize, we'll talk a bit more about it, and we'll have to, have a conversation about the MMC and the Transbots one as they evolve. But that's what I got for now. That one felt good. Hope it was of some interest. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.